This video is brought to you by my patrons. Stay tuned until the end or go to patreon.com/JennyGeist to find out how you can join in on supporting the channel. Howdy folks, I'm Jenny Geist. A year and a half ago, I did a video about 3DS licensed games where the oh-so-prevalent gaming genre of movie and TV show tie-ins finally began to die down. What was once omnipresent in the PS2 and Wii era was now the exception, as the majority of studios moved their gaming efforts to the mobile market, with the 3DS being the last breath of the genre as we used to know it. You're not going to find a cheaply made platformer based off of Turning Red or Encanto the same way you'd have found ones for Big Hero 6 or Frozen back in 2014. And you're especially not going to find multiple games from multiple studios for every single Pixar, DreamWorks, and Disney release like what used to be standard. These days, the only brands that can get licensed games are the biggest of the big, the Marvels, Star Wars, and DCs of the world that can afford larger budgets and prestigious studios. Sure, there are tons of anime games from Japanese studios, and the occasional indie thing utilizing a smaller IP, but as far as true, honest-to-god licensed tie-in releases go, the pickings are getting slim. But come on, if you've watched my videos, you'd know that I wouldn't be practicing my due diligence if I didn't analyze the slim pickings that do exist. That's right, I may have said I don't do follow-up videos, but I never said anything about sequels, so today I'll be playing 9 different games that embody this era while highlighting the contemporaries that I missed. There are so few games remaining in this genre that I genuinely might be able to at least mention all of them. Even if the licensed tie-in as we know it is mostly gone, there's still a lot of artistry to be found in this mostly dead genre, whether it be good, bad, or downright hilarious. But probably bad, let's just get that out of the way. Let's kick things off with Ice Age Scrat's Nutty Adventure, a tying into the Ice Age franchise that released 3 years after the final Ice Age film and 3 years before the Buck Wild spin-off. What? Well, I can't not talk about this. If God put me on this planet for any reason, it was almost certainly to point out how fucking inane the Ice Age series is. I do not understand how this series is still going despite leaving no impact on pop culture, and I do not understand why they gave Scrat the Squirrel a licensed platformer in the year 2019. I wanted to start with this game though, not just because of how fascinated I am by the series' complete and utter lack of marketability, but also because Scrat's Nutty Adventure is an honest-to-god low-budget 3D platformer, the type of release that was by far the most common in the genre's prime. On the PS2 and Wii, you couldn't go 2 steps without running into this type of release, yet now they're surprisingly rare within the overall genre. You'll occasionally see one based on a preschooler IP like PJ Masks or Paw Patrol, and there's a couple based on B-tier animated releases like Hotel Transylvania 4 or the Addams Family reboot, but as far as Western IPs go, that's literally it. And after revisiting the genre with Scrat's Nutty Adventure, I can understand why. This game blows wet Mammoth Dookie. The setup is about what you'd expect from a game based on that funny squirrel from the Ice Age movies. While chasing after his beloved acorn, Scrat falls into a mysterious temple and activates the challenge of the Scratazons, where a mysterious voice commands him to find the 4 crystal nuts spread throughout the land to prove himself as the mightiest warrior and lead the Scratazons into a golden age. For each crystal nut that Scrat collects, the voice grants him magical powers, including a double jump, the Scratapult, and of course levitation. What else would you expect from a game about Scrat Squirrelington? And yes, they are called the Crystal Nuts, I didn't make that up. I'm currently on holiday break while writing this, so I'll give you all 3 seconds to come up with a joke for yourself. Good. Unfortunately, despite that Buck Wild sounding premise, the actual gameplay is about as generic as it comes. After landing in a hub area, you venture off into 5 different worlds based on generic prehistoric locales and featuring every overused platforming challenge in the book. There's the scattered collectibles like these shards that do nothing but unlock concept art in the menu, statue pieces that do nothing but appear in the hub area, and health pickups that don't even matter because the combat is brain dead easy. 90% of enemies are a literal joke to fight as they can't really strike back once you start beating the shit out of them. Every now and then you'll come across a similarly brain-dead puzzle where you move around these glowing acorns to open up doors or push giant blocks to do generic block puzzle things, and they are indeed quite brain-dead. I'll give them some credit for making it a somewhat open experience. The levels are predominantly linear, but they all connect to each other cohesively with branching paths and optional collectibles. But even that isn't handled that well, as the individual levels of each world lack any sort of distinct iconography. They'll usually usually be anchored around some sort of river or mountain, but the locales never culminate into anything new or interesting. Sure, the worlds have their unique mechanics, but they're strewn about with so little thought and with so little progression that they instead feel like plug-and-play set pieces inserted to mix things up. Every time you get to a wall jump section, you wall jump. There's no choice or memorability in your actions, it's just, wow, that sure was the part where I wall jumped. I already touched upon how weak and flimsy the combat is, but the jump in particular just feels bad. They just can't figure out how to give the squirrel's movement any sort of weight or impact. They don't even know how to make it a good Ice Age game. Scrat is the only character from the movies to appear besides a few brief cameos and bosses, like the dinosaur from the third movie who cameos at the very end, but not as a boss, he's just there. The aforementioned crystal nut lore feels woefully out of place, and the few cutscenes that do exist don't even get the comedic timing right. The game ends with, of all things, Scrat being abducted by an alien that looks like this. And then it just ends. That's it. They ended their game with a thick squirrel lady. Okay, whatever. All in all, while I doubt anyone expected much from this Ice Age game that released in 2019, I do think it's a shame that the developers Just Add Water were saddled with it. I haven't played many of their games, but to go from working on well-liked series like Oddworld or Gravity Crash to one of the most bottom-of-the-barrel licensed games you can imagine couldn't have been fun for them. After 20 years of crappy animated tie-ins, the public at large has caught on to how poorly made most of these experiences are and has generally veered away from them. It's telling that I could only find 4 other modern licensed platformers beyond this one, but since this type of product is what gave licensed games their bad name in the first place, I have nothing else to say but good. You may be wondering what the rest of the licensed scene looks like if the omnipresent platformers have essentially died out. This is where the era's first big stylistic shift can be found, as despite there being less tie-ins overall, the ones that do exist are much more varied in genre. Some of these are to be expected. You'll have your top-down adventures like this My Little Pony game or that weird DreamWorks Dragon spin-off. The DC Super Pets tie-in is an on-rail shooter in the vein of Star Fox, and the Fast and Furious animated show has a pretty standard racing sim. Again, nothing especially interesting, but certainly more varied than it was before. By far the most fascinating of this new group, though, is Hotel Transylvania 3 Monsters Overboard. Viewers, I have a question. What would you all expect from a game based on the 2018 film Hotel Transylvania 3 Summer Vacation? I'm serious, what pops into mind? Maybe another 3D platformer like the aforementioned Hotel Transylvania 4 tie-in game? One where the quote-unquote Drac Pack jumps through various monster-themed locales? How about a minigame collection based on summery or monstery activities? That'd be pretty easy. Perhaps it's a top-down adventure where you explore this monster cruise ship and find secrets or whatever. If you guessed any of those 3, you are wrong, because it's fucking Pikmin? It's just Pikmin. They didn't even change it that much, it's just Pikmin. Hotel Transylvania 3 Monsters Overboard is one of the weirdest licensed games that I've ever played, and I am not being hyperbolic. When I think of Adam Sandler Dracula, Selena Gomez Mavis, and Haha Jonathan You Are Banging My Daughter, I do not think of a real-time strategy game where you command an army of tiny creatures that do your bidding within a strict timeline. But I guess I'm a fucking idiot, because this game has all, and I mean all, of the drapings of the Pikmin series, including but not limited to armies of minions who can fight enemies and lift objects for you and are grouped together with a whistle, a time of day mechanic that limits how long you can be out and leaves abandoned minions out to die, items that can be brought to spawners that gradually expand your army, multiple types of minions who each have their own unique mechanics in both exploration and combat, puzzles that involve bringing together bridges or pushing aside blocks, boss fights scattered throughout each world that gate progression to the next area, and a specific type of object or being that you're searching for throughout the entire adventure. It's not even subtle. The only thing they really changed from the source material is the game's overall structure, and I'm not even sure if that was intentional or just the developers not knowing how to make a good Pikmin game. I'd argue it's more of a top-down puzzler than an honest-to-god strategy game, and I wouldn't even say it's all that good of a top-down puzzler. Part of this just has to do with scope. Obviously, a studio like Taurus Games that has exclusively pumped out licensed products for the past 2 decades is not going to have the time or budget they need to recapture Miyamoto's magnum opus series. Most Pikmin games have 5 to 6 worlds, this one just has 3. Pikmin's worlds are are vibrant and beautiful, and based on the 4 seasons, these ones exclusively take place on these 3 similar-looking deserted islands. The shortest game in the Pikmin series takes 8 hours to beat, while an average playthrough of Monsters Overboard takes 4 to 6. All pretty standard fare, honestly. Even the best licensed games inevitably deal with these types of time and scope-related roadblocks. The problem with this one in particular is that real-time strategy games are much harder to half-ass than platformers or adventure games. For example, let's look at how they use the story. On the way home from the events of Hotel Transylvania 3, the cruise ship they're riding gets caught in a storm that blows away the Drac Pack and strands them on some deserted islands. With the help of mysterious little creatures called Impas, Dracula and Mavis must navigate these islands and save their friends. Ironically, a similar setup to the first Pikmin game, but this time without any sort of overarching time limit, which is weird because there is a time limit to how long you can be on the map and the game is still organized into nights. I know, vampires can't be out during the day, but beyond that very literal interpretation of the lore, there's basically no reason for this game to be split into nights at all. With no overarching time limit, the only thing at stake is the chance of losing Impas that are not in your party when the night concludes, which for reasons we'll get into later is probably not going to happen. The timer not only adds nothing, but it could be argued that it removes one's incentive to strategize in the first place. If you wanted, you could very methodically do 1 action per night and finish the game in 100 nights, and the results would be no different than clearing the game in 10 nights. Why even bother to rush things then? It's literally just a vestige of the source material that they forgot to actually work around, which is honestly how you can describe most of the game's mechanics. For example, Impas can't bring objects to the Impa portal on their own like Pikmin can to their onion. They need to manually be walked everywhere. Building a bridge, bring the pieces over there one at a time. Found a key item, carefully navigate to its destination, and pray it doesn't get caught on the environment as you move. Collecting Imparite, this game's equivalent to Pikmin pellets? Guess what? You need to manually bring those back to the Impa portals yourself to increase your ranks. It's especially annoying because red Imparite requires 2 Impas to carry but only produces 1 additional unit, and blue Imparite requires 3 Impas to carry but only produces 2, so you need to work twice as hard to get half the reward when building up your army, and once other typings come into play, it can get really complicated. I do think it's clever for the Impa typings to be based on different types of monsters, with vampire Impas being like pink Pikmin, Frankenstein Impas being like purple Pikmin, and wolf Impas being able to dig. It's a solid twist on the idea that unfortunately isn't integrated all that well. Often you'll reach a point in the map where you need, say, 4 vampire Impas to lift a platform or 4 Frankenstein Impas to push an object. From the outside, that doesn't sound too bad, but then you realize that you only have 10 to 15 Impas out at once, and it becomes way more of a pain. You might bring in 3 of each type only to discover that you actually needed 4 of one type and 2 of another, so you have to go all the way back to your Impa portal and change the type ratio to solve that puzzle, which is immediately followed by another puzzle that this time needs 4 of the other type, forcing you to go all the way back and change up your roster again. With a claustrophobic map and limited supply, the player is forced to micromanage the same few units to do anything at any given time, rather than using your extended army to their fullest potential. This is even more cumbersome when it pertains to combat. You're supposed to fight enemies by slowly throwing your Impas forward, letting them attack, and then recalling them before the enemy can strike back, one by one until their health is whittled down. Pretty standard Pikmin stuff, except Impas automatically lock on to nearby enemies, even if said enemies are charging right towards them with an attack that will instantly kill them. Since Impas attack way slower than Pikmin and it's harder to tell when they'll die, it's easy to blow through your forces on one common enemy without noticing. And since defeating an enemy rewards Imparite, most encounters end up being a zero-sum game. You lose some Impas, but gain the ability to spawn new Impas, so nothing happened. It's a bad game. I'll give it credit for some decent presentation, as the visuals are pretty solid and give a clear indication of where you have to go, and the textures and models are surprisingly high quality for a game of this caliber, but even then, the music is fairly irritating and repetitive, and the cutscenes are on the Legend of Korra: A New Era Begins side of the awfulness spectrum. I don't know, I tried to be generous with this one since I really do respect the ambition. It's a great showpiece for how much more varied licensed games can be these days, but mostly it's just baby's first Pikmin if your baby is the Omeless child. Also, if they wanted to take a B-tier animated franchise and turn it into a Pikmin-esque strategy game where you command a bunch of little guys to do your bidding, they should have done that with Despicable Me. Come on! You might have noticed that so far I've only covered games based off of B-tier animated franchises that nobody really cares about. I mean, Ice Age is one of the most anomalous franchises to ever hit the $1 billion $100 barrier, so much so that I genuinely want to do a video about how little impact this series has left, and the only time I've ever seen discussion of Hotel Transylvania was when the trailer for the 4th movie dropped and people were either excited that a Blackpink song was in it or mad that the Invisible Man wasn't sexy. And obviously, one of those is completely absurd. Blackpink isn't even that. Oh, I forgot to mention, I've been recording this section at the harbor. Anyway, as far as K-pop bands go, Blackpink is just kinda... And don't even get me started on... Only covering these B-tier releases isn't just me picking and choosing which games I want to play for funny YouTube haha points. As I mentioned in the intro, studios like Disney and Pixar have found other avenues to siphon money from the masses without having to stoop to outsourcing tie-in games. Instead, they've courted larger developers to produce massive-scale projects or pumped out freemium mobile games like they're nothing. Since those require a certain amount of money or brand prestige that neither Blue Sky Studios or Sony Pictures Animation have, it makes sense that these less successful studios are going to favor the old-fashioned way to profit off of their IPs. Unfortunately, that also applies to companies that have had successful games in the past, like Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network. Probably the most disappointing game of this bunch for me was Adventure Time: Pirates of the Enchiridion for the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. Having released just a few months before the show's finale back in 2018, this is currently the final game in the Adventure Time series, and it was not a great note to go out on. It's a shame, too. Hey Ice King, Why'd You Steal Our Garbage on the 3DS was such a neat throwback to Zelda 2 that the idea of them doing something similar but with Wind Waker was an absolute banger. This is a seafaring adventure game set in a flooded land of Ooo, casting Finn, Jake, Marceline, and Vimo as pirates trying to save the world. It has an open world and turn-based battles and lots of collectibles and an original story. It fits in visually and mechanically with the amazing Islands miniseries that aired a year prior while still having a distinct tone and identity. The foundation is clearly there, but it's also clear that the developers didn't even remotely have enough time to build on it. For example, let's talk about the combat. I do like the concept of a turn-based game where MP is a universal stat that builds up each turn and has to be divided strategically among the party members. It evokes some of that Final Fantasy ATB energy while still putting a unique spin on the concept, and while there's only 4 party members, they do each fill a unique niche. Finn is an all-arounder who can attack with his different swords, Jake's stretchy moves can hit multiple targets at once, Marceline is a bruiser with higher attack cost but higher damage output, and Bimo is the support. If the game were any longer, that little of a party would definitely make it repetitive, but for a 6-ish hour campaign, sure, whatever. It sucks that Princess Bubblegum isn't playable because she's one of the top 5 unproblematic girl bosses of all time and my personal role model, but it's fine. It's undercooked, but there's bigger fish to fry. The exploration isn't too exciting and you have to revisit worlds a lot, but again, it could be worse. The characters sing little shanties together as you sail from waypoint to waypoint, and it's cute. I can imagine a world where this is like a 5 out of 10 game that isn't great but isn't bad either. Unfortunately, this one falters in a way that I haven't talked about yet, but any licensed game player would be well aware of. The optimization. This game runs like hot garbage. Granted, I was playing it on the Switch, but even if it doesn't run like garbage elsewhere, it sure does here, and it sure does diminish any possible enjoyment that this humble game could have provided. This game has surpassed LEGO City Undercover in having some of the worst load times of any game I've ever played. Between the logos, autosave, title screen, and loading screen, it takes 2 minutes and 15 seconds to reach gameplay after boot up. It takes 15 to 20 seconds for battles to load upon being initiated, and 5 to 10 seconds to return to gameplay after completion. There's loading screens for boarding or unboarding your boat, entering your stat menu, starting or ending a cutscene, even to load other loading screens, all for a game that can't even keep a stable 30 FPS. Don't get me wrong, the Ice Age game didn't run amazingly or anything, but it was much easier to stomach in a quick and easy platformer compared to an attempted lengthy RPG. And all of these technical issues compound when you consider that I don't really like this game's art style. It does that thing that the Simpsons game did where it ratchets the cell shading up to 11 in an attempt to match the look of 2D art, and I am not into this style at all. With few exceptions like the game Hi-Fi Hi-Fi Rush from earlier this year, I just don't think the characteristics of simplistic 2D animation translate into a non-fixed 3D environment. If the camera can freely rotate around the character, then the characters need to have animations that work from every angle, which instantly removes the freedom that 2D animation is supposed to give. It all stands to make the game look kinda 2D and still screenshots, but like an oversaturated neon mess in actual motion. The intense colors coming in from every direction end up canceling each other out and make everything blend together. It's difficult to tell what's important when every visual on screen is given the same amount of colorful prominence. It's not a good game, guys. Evoking memories of the Wind Waker didn't trick me into liking that one Origami King chapter, and it was not going to trick me into giving this game a pass either. For every one decent idea, there's 3 execution issues, and I felt zero desire to finish it. I could get all the way through Scrat, I could get 2/3 of the way through Hotel Transylvania, but I could barely even get halfway through this one thanks to the technical and mechanical issues. Game styles as ambitious as Pikmin or the Wind Waker simply need a proper budget and development time to flesh themselves out. It's much easier to dumb down a 2D game where short experiences are the norm and you don't have to model massive environments. Applying those same cutbacks to genres that have much higher standards just isn't going to work. The gap in quality is far more visible. I can accept a game being short or having backtracking if it isn't actively miserable to play or ugly to look at, but the awful optimization, mediocre art style, and misguided design decisions keep Pirates of the Enchiridion from ever overcoming those issues. If you look at the output of the game's publisher, though, this mediocrity shouldn't be surprising. Outright Games has also produced such classics as Ice Age Scrat's Nutty Adventure, and Hotel Transylvania 3 Monsters Overboard, and those games I mentioned based off of the Addams Family, DC Super Pets, Fast and Furious, How to Train Your Dragon, My Little Pony, PJ Masks, and Paw Patrol. And they've done games about Ben 10 and Transformers and Peppa Pig, and okay, are there any recent licensed games that these guys haven't touched? Well, yes and no. There are still some other licensed game publishers, like Microids and the hilariously titled game Mill Entertainment. But with a few exceptions, those are basically it. Like, yeah, the olden days had their shovelware-focused publishers like THQ or EA, but those were far from the only studios to publish them as a whole. Ubisoft would make an open season game, Activision would make a Madagascar game, EA would make a Looney Tunes game, and Warner Brothers produced the LEGO series. Stuff like that doesn't happen anymore. Big studios just don't give a fuck. If you want to market your movie with a tie-in game, you're gonna have to settle for Outright Games. Might as well make that their company slogan. At this point, I've probably said all there is to say about the worst of the licensed game genre. The main difference between the boring licensed games of the past and the boring licensed games of today is that sometimes the newer ones are a little more ambitious. Frankly, I'm much more interested in the modern licensed games that succeed than the ones that don't, so let's shift gears and take a look at how the good ones differ from the bad. And to stick with the theme, I'll start with possibly the best outright game of the bunch. Yeah, a good one does exist, and it's not just good, it's great. Finally, some good fucking food. Steven Universe Save the Light is a 2017 console RPG based on the beloved Cartoon Network series, and it freaking rocks. Of all the licensed games I've played on my channel, this one is by far my favorite, and that's not just my bias as a Steven Universe fan speaking. I mean, I love Gravity Falls even more than I love Steven Universe, and we all know how that show's game turned out. Stefan University already shares a ton of DNA with RPGs and adventure games, even beyond the obvious Easter eggs of Steven owning a GameCube and a Cloud Strife action figure. The show is literally about a party of rebels fighting against a politically dense fascist regime to defend a colonized planet, slowly increasing their ranks as they show their foes the value of life, and discovering colorful new locales to find lore and fight enemies in. There's not much you need to change to make it work. All you need is a studio who knows their stuff with a vision that is reasonable for the license, and this game has both. Grumpy Face Studios originally began as a mobile game developer working on smaller projects for miscellaneous Cartoon Network shows until their breakout hit of Steven Universe Attack the Light in 2015. This was a dungeon-crawling Paper Mario-like that took place during the show's first season and shares a lot of its same charms. The only playable characters are Steven, Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, who each fulfill a unique niche in the turn-based combat that of course has the action commands you'd expect from a game like this. The dungeon-crawling aspect was extremely surface level, and the experience as a whole was only 2 hours long, but fans enjoyed it nonetheless for capturing the show's vibe with some genuinely competent action. It was well received believed enough that when it came time to make a sequel, Cartoon Network did the unthinkable. They gave the developers a budget to make a proper expanded console game, and unlike something more ambitious and taxing like a 3D Zelda, they were taking inspiration from Paper Mario. You don't need to meticulously model and fill in an entire open world when you can just translate the show's incredible backgrounds and set design into a flat, pastel-colored town. You don't need to awkwardly translate Steven and the gyms into 3D when you can just use their flat, chibi models that blend in perfectly with the game's locales. With how many Paper Mario-inspired indie games there are, getting an indie studio to create an indie-budget game is literally perfect. To quote Alex Hirsch, "Don't waste money with big studios and lots of internal overhead. Give the project to a seasoned indie studio with a reasonable scope and you can achieve way more with way less." While the original was mostly limited to these dull top-down dungeon levels, Save the Light has a large, immersive, mostly connected overworld full of NPCs, puzzles, and secrets. For the very first time, fans could explore Beach City, the Great North, the Strawberry Battlefield, Bismuth's Forge, the Ancient Sky Arena, Lapis and Peridot's Barn, the occasional new location relating to the game's own specific lore. There's just enough variety that none of the areas get stale, and whenever you revisit one, they introduce a nice little wrinkle. I love running pizza deliveries for the cooler Jenny. I love going back to earlier worlds with new party members to find secrets. One of the biggest appeals of any licensed game is to explore the world of a movie or show on your own terms, and this game nailed that aspect way more than most do. They didn't just improve the exploration either, combat also got a pretty nice overhaul. They expanded upon the bare-bones Paper Mario-esque format of the original by adding a Final Fantasy-esque ATB system that really complements this new scope well. All actions require the usage of stars that steadily build up at all times, so players must strategically pick which attacks to use and when to protect themselves. Waiting for the star meter to charge could have been tedious, but there's just enough real-time gameplay to keep the player on their toes. The placement of party members and enemies in the battlefield can actually influence the battle. Some characters have AoE attacks that can only influence a certain area, some enemies are only safe to attack from behind. The relative randomness of each character's placement means you can't fall back on any one specific strategy. As the party expands, the player is encouraged to try new strategies for optimum success. Oh, and speaking of the party, the game initially starts with Steven, Connie, and Greg as the main party, with Steven being the support, Connie being the DPS, and Greg being a bard. Throughout the journey, you'll unlock Pearl, Amethyst, Garnet, and Peridot, each introducing new abilities both in and out of combat. Pearl is another sword-focused attacker who plays more offensively than Connie. Garnet is a tanky, heavy-hitting attacker whose abilities use up more star power than the rest. Amethyst can hit multiple enemies at once with her whip, but only from certain positions. And Peridot is a builder archetype who can create turrets and debuff zones within the confines of the battlefield. They are introduced gradually enough that the player can learn the benefits and drawbacks to each character, and by the time everyone has joined, the possibilities feel endless. The level up system has this built-in skill tree where you can specifically decide which stats to level up, allowing you to not only make the game as easy or as hard as you wish, but to really nail in which archetype you want each party member to fill. It ends up adding so many wrinkles to the Paper Mario formula that it barely even feels like the source material once you figure it all out, which is not something I could say about most of the earlier games on this list. My only gripe with this game is that the story itself isn't all that interesting. The light games are cool for having their own unique running storyline that isn't contradicted by the main series, even introducing some new characters like the antagonist Hessonite, but being so tied to canon, they can't really do that much in the way of stakes or character development. It's all pretty surface level. Beyond some cute dialogue interactions and some usual Peridot goodness, there's not much to write home about. I find the ending in particular to be way too rushed, and that's coming from someone who thinks the change your mind ending is good actually. Despite some flaws, Save the Light is basically the gold standard for how to make a licensed game. It combines a reasonable budget and scope with a passionate dev team who respects the source material to make a memorable love letter to both the show and the genre as a whole. I highly recommend it to hardcore and casual fans alike, and it makes me glad that this type of experience is much more common than it used to be. I mean, SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake just came out, and it's apparently a great evolution of the Battle for Bikini Bottom formula. I totally would have covered it here if the timing worked out better. Then last year had TMNT Shredder's Revenge, which updated the old beat-em-up style to modern sensibilities, and even a weird concept like the Mummy Demastered from 2017 ended up being a surprisingly decent Metroidvania of all things. It's almost as if publishers are revisiting their licensed past, picking and choosing what worked best, and then expanding upon it with the help of passionate developers who grew up on those earlier examples. Nowhere is this more evident than the recent phenomenon of classic licensed games being being re-released or remade, quite literally plucking out the best of the best from the old era and leaving behind all the crap. This is a pretty unexpected development. For the longest time, companies treated all licensed tie-ins equally as products meant to trick confused parents into buying them for the holidays and nothing more. It doesn't matter if one of them ended up being genuinely good, because it'd be treated no differently than the rest of the completely disposable crowd. Only recently have companies taken notice of the genuine nostalgia that people have for some of their games, and this means stuff that's almost never been re-released finally has another chance at life. I'm gonna skip over the obvious raved about examples like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the game or SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, as pretty much everyone has talked about those at this point. Instead, I'm going to look at one of the more forgotten retro compilations to come out with the Disney Afternoon Collection. This is a 2017 compilation of 6 critically acclaimed Capcom platformers from the NES era, those being DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, TaleSpin, Darkwing Duck, DuckTales 2, and Rescue Rangers 2. If you've played any of the Mega Man Legacy collections, you'd know what to expect here. You've got 6 highly polished ROMs of these early 90s classics, additional speedrun and boss rush modes for each title, and an assortment of concept art, promotional material, and media scans that you can check out on the side. The collection is presented through this delightfully retro menu featuring catchy new arrangements of each game's iconic theme, with the games themselves having custom drawn and surprisingly non-intrusive border options to fill in the 4x3 screen. You can access guides that show you how to play each game, set or load save states at basically any time, or rewind your gameplay to make the experience easier and more accessible. As far as retro collections go, the Disney Afternoon Collection doesn't break any new ground, but it presents these games exceptionally well. My only exposure to any of these beforehand was through the stellar DuckTales Remastered back in 2013, so being able to experience the original and its contemporaries was pretty interesting. For reference, here's a speed round of my thoughts on all 6 games. 1989 DuckTales. Is it a hot take to say this is one of the best NES games? Everything about it, from the linear levels full of non-linear paths to the endlessly fun pogo stick mechanic to that iconic soundtrack, feels just as good today as it did when it came out. It's genuinely timeless. 1990 Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. While not as tight or iconic as DuckTales, I dug how this was basically just a loosey-goosey remake of Mario Bros. 2, but possibly better, honestly. The level variety and co-op are super impressive for the time, even if it's not my personal favorite. 1991 TaleSpin. Honestly, not really my thing. I don't care for shoot-em-ups as a genre and have no interest in TaleSpin as a series. Being able to switch your direction at any time was a cool twist, but it wasn't enough to distract from the dull and often frustrating level design. 1992 Darkwing Duck. This is unfortunately my least favorite of the bunch. As fun as it was to latch onto ceilings and try different weapons, the level design just felt like Mega Man but worse. It's one of those games where I'd hover my finger over the rewind button for most of it. 1993 DuckTales 2! They weren't lying, that DuckTales really be 2. Which is to say, it's an iterative sequel, but still a fun one. I like that they slightly expanded upon Scrooge's cane abilities, although I did get soft-locked at one point by missing an upgrade, which was annoying. 1994 Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers 2. They weren't lying, that Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers also be 2. This one is even more iterative than DuckTales 2, as it didn't even add any new mechanics, but it's fine. The long and unskippable cutscenes were boring, but again, it's fine. Overall, this is a really solid collection. For just $20, you can experience 2 excellent games, 2 good but iterative sequels, and 2 so-so but not terrible experiences, all in their best form. It's a shame that it fell so under the radar, but considering it released in April of 2017 for PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and not Switch, yeah, it's easy to understand why. I get that this was when the Switch was new and unproven, so there was some hesitation to bring it over, but a collection of NES games not being available on a Nintendo platform kneecapped this game's performance hard. Playing it on PC with an Xbox 360 controller worked fine, but it just felt so cursed. Luckily, this underperformance didn't stop studios from porting some of their other retro titles later on. In 2019, Disney released a compilation of the Genesis and Game Boy versions of Aladdin and the Lion King, later updating it to add the Jungle Book game and the SNES version of Aladdin. This one's especially cool for having video interviews with the developers in the behind-the-scenes section. I wish more compilations did this. Furthermore, Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue can be downloaded on PS5 as part of Sony's PS1 re-release efforts. GoldenEye 007 came to Game Pass and NSO recently. That TMNT Cowabunga collection last year combined 13 different Ninja Turtle games into one compilation. Even that Ghostbusters game for the Wii, which got the original cast back as voice actors, got a second chance in the sun. It's so nice to see an overlooked genre like this one get so much love on modern platforms, and I really hope this trend continues. I'd love a remaster of The Simpsons Hit and Run, or that bizarre but apparently really good King Kong game, or Walt Disney World Quest Magical Racing 2 tour. I mean, I know Disney left the video game industry a couple years ago, but they have made some nice efforts to sneak their way back in. Disney Zoom Zoom Festival, a 2019 Switch exclusive, is a solid example of this. Unlike the prior two examples in this category, it's not exactly a game that you or I are going to be crazy interested in. Being based on a toy line, it is very much aimed at kids, even more than most licensed games are, but I'm okay with something skewing younger in age if it is actually designed in a way that younger folks can enjoy and older folks can appreciate. In this case, Disney didn't just toss off this project to some low-rank publisher without the time or resources they needed to make something worthwhile. They actually got Bandai Namco to develop it, a respected publisher that gave the project a budget and marketing and even online multiplayer. It's less of a Scrat's Nutty Adventure or Pirates of the Enchiridion, and more of a LEGO The Incredibles or Disney Dreamlight Valley, a polished, well-done AA license game utilizing a smaller but still popular IP, or in these cases, a crossover of a bunch of IPs. Zoom Zoom Festival is a minigame collection, another licensed game staple, featuring 10 modes that can be played on solo for high scores, competitively among 2 to 4 players, or cooperatively with friends. Most of them only require one Joy-Con, and since the Switch automatically comes with 2 of those, you're guaranteed to have a playmate for each of these. I'm gonna once again do a brief review of each of them, this time ranked from worst to best. Number 10, Zoom Rhythm. Most disappointing game in the bunch for me. I love rhythm games, and a Disney rhythm game would honestly be dope, but basing your rhythm game entirely on motion controls is a terrible idea. There is no consistency on what registers as a shake or not, and I hate it. Number 9, Egg Pack Coaster. Genuinely did not understand this one at all. The instructions say to tilt with the track and mash to get rid of eggs, but I do that and the eggs drop on you anyway, and I mash but they only go away sometimes, and the track goes on for a very long time and I don't know what's going on, and the game just crashed on me. Oops. Number 8, Zoom Chase. It's just Pac-Man, which is funny because Pac-Man is literally an unlockable character that can be used in any of the modes. You know, the famous character from Wreck-It Ralph and nothing else. Number 7, Ice Cream Stacker. Tilt the Joy-Con to stack an ice cream cone and that's it. Definitely something that's been done many times before, but I do kinda like the twist on this one. Given Zoom Zoom's whole thing was stacking, this kind of game was inevitable, so I'll give it a pass. Number 6, Round and Round Run. A race down an obstacle course where you must collect as many gems as possible before hitting the finish line. If you've played Kirby's Dream Buffet, it's basically just that, which isn't a bad thing. Not deep, but not bad. Number 5, Zoom Zoom Mania. Love the presentation of this one. For a motion-controlled shoot-'em-up minigame, the flashy pixelated enemies and the unique patterns they come in look really nice. Gameplay isn't anything mind-blowing once again, but it's another polished one that I think kids would enjoy. Love the detail that you're literally shooting out smaller clones of yourself as ammo. Number 4, Spinner Battle. They blade your opponent in a few different ways. One mode sees you trying to make the highest stack with the more knockouts you get, the taller you become. One mode sees you protecting an ally with the more knockouts it gets, the shorter it becomes. And one is just a free-for-all for whoever grabs the most gems. Very much a Mario Party minigame, but definitely a fun Mario Party minigame. Number 3, Bubble Hockey. 2v2 air hockey with items and frenzies. Yeah, this one's a riot. I love how quick it is, how frenzies will just start and send a bunch of pucks out at once to be chaotically balanced, how this item can launch the puck at your opponent and knock them out, but if it hits you, the same thing happens. Yeah, this would be a ton of fun at parties. Number 2, Zoom Curling. Yeah, I don't give a crap about curling, but this is a fun take on it. You carefully charge the power of your shot, shake the controller to sweep in front of your puck, and you can even control the puck's direction after launching it by using the control stick. You get these random power-up pucks with miscellaneous effects and have to use them at strategic times to be in the bullseye by the final round. I dig it. Another one I could see being fun with friends. Number 1, Zoom Zoom Puzzle, a console port of the Zoom Zoom mobile game that's exclusive to handheld mode. This is such a cool inclusion, guys. I always love when mobile games get console ports to preserve them forever, and this is actually one that I really enjoyed as a teen. I already liked Zoom Zooms, as you can see from my collection, and the Zoom Zoom mobile game was a frantic and active take on your typical Connect 3 game that's still a lot of fun. The mobile version was unfortunately bogged down by some pretty oppressive gacha mechanics that eventually drove me away from it, but luckily this game doesn't have that. If you want Aurora from Sleeping Beauty, you don't have to spend real money when she appears in the gachapon cycle. She can be unlocked in-game with coins. The unlock methods to get more playable Zoom Zooms are admittedly pretty annoying. You either spend 10,000 coins apiece on a gift that will be completely random, or grind away on this awful awful coin drop minigame to unlock random units. They didn't fully remove the randomness, and that sucks, but it's not paid gacha anymore, which is still a huge improvement. Once I got the famous Disney character Pac-Man, I didn't need anyone else anyway. Even though some of the minigames are way more one-note than others, I still think there's more fun than not, and even the weaker ones work in the context of this game's party mode. Here, players can string together a bunch of minigames in a random order to be played in quick succession, so the fast nature of some of these activities feels a bit less out of place. As I mentioned earlier, the overall simplicity makes this a really great introductory game for younger children. To any parents or babysitters or younger sibling havers in the audience, I honestly recommend it. The presentation is cute and poppy, the music is surprisingly great, and the Zoom Zooms themselves are, of course, very adorable. And that's basically it. I've said all there is to say about the licensed game genre as it exists now. There's less of them overall, but the ones that do exist are generally better. The growth of indies in the 2010s has given companies a new outlet to promote their works, the greater demand for remasters of classic games has inevitably trickled into the licensed scene, and AA studios are picking up the slack with some polished mid-budget examples. The crappier games are at the very least playable, ambitious, or occasionally charming, and since they're all confined to the output of one or two mediocre publishers, they're not really hurting anyone either. So that's it, right? Video over? Don't forget to sub? Haha, no. Silly viewer, I can't be done with this analysis until I talk about the big boys. You may be asking, what are the big boys? And to that, I scoff. The big boys are the licensed game archetypes that are universal, subgenres that leech off the marketability of larger, more popular series to live on forever, regardless of the state of licensed gaming as a whole. Trends, new and old, that permeate across all media companies, demographics, and age ranges, and will likely never die. There are a lot of licensed platformers, and there are a lot of licensed minigame collections, but both pale in comparison to that of the licensed kart racer. Garfield Kart, Nickelodeon Kart Racers, Hello Kitty Cruisers, Hot Wheels Unleashed, Cars 3 Driven to Win, Smurfs Kart, Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2, Disney Speedstorm, Race with Ryan, Paw Patrol Grand Prix, Gigantosaurus Dino Kart, Horrid Henry's Crazy Karts, Nickelodeon Kart Racers 3, Warped Kart Racers, Blaze and the Monster Machines Axle City Racers, and today's subject, Garfield Kart Furious Racing. Now, you might expect me to shit on this transparent and audacious brand extension of the famous cartoon strip feline that is slowly fading into obscurity. After all, licensed kart racers are usually quite bad. With few exceptions, they're almost all transparent Mario Kart ripoffs with low-poly characters and acid-flipped race courses throwing around unbalanced items. No adult human with a semblance of taste would play this for themselves over the infinitely more polished and refined source material it's clearly suckling off of. What's the use in dredging up the specific Garfield-themed example besides the simple joys of shitting on a bad game? Well, dear viewers, what if I told you that unlike its contemporaries, Garfield Kart Furious Racing is an amazing game that completely blew my expectations out of the water and forced me to rearrange this entire video around it? You see, most Mario Kart games limit themselves to boring Mario or racing adjacent courses like a speedway or castle or rainbow, all very boring or childish or unrealistic. Garfield Kart Furious Racing, on the other hand, keeps it real. So real, in fact, that the first course is not only Garfield and John's neighborhood, it is very cleverly called Cats in the Hood. And that's cats with a Z. This is an extremely clever concept. Garfield and John obviously live in a neighborhood, but within the two-dimensional constraints of a 3-panel comic strip meant only to supply gags and guffaws, it is impossible to explore the streets where John Arbuckle might walk or Garfield Arbuckle might snoop. Like any good licensed game, Garfield Kart Furious Racing allows you to explore this pivotal location, driving around the block to discover what fuels the psyche of Odie and friends. You'll discover that John doesn't live in the safe side of town. Oil slicks over a nearby street, a massive fire hazard that slicks the tires of your wheels. Lasagna, the treat of which Garfield oh so desires, provides the safe boon of a speed boost from danger. But pies, the treat of which Garfield despises, can hone in on you nonetheless to upend your vehicle in a dangerously brutal display. This previously unseen, cruel side to Garfield's world only gets worse the farther one ventures from the cat's homestead, such as as the track City Slicker. You may be confused by the fact that a location is named after an unreclaimed slur aimed at those who live in cities rather than a name of an actual location, but that's what makes this course so brilliant. City Slicker is a section of a city with wet roads which are slick. It's not a safe space, it doesn't care about your feelings, it cares about being a dangerous, unsafe race course for Garfield and his many colleagues to journey through, testing them far more than any juvenile comic strip or Saturday morning cartoon can. So, anyway, many have praised the Harry Potter series for supposedly growing in maturity and complexity as the books continued, growing along with the audiences who read the first installments as children. Garfield Kart Furious Racing is that principle applied to the Garfield franchise. Those that read the first ever Garfield comic strips in 1978 will now be 45 years old, and this experience is for them. Those who first enjoyed the wondrous character of Squeak from the 1984 strip Garfield and Friends can finally play as him and explore his journey as he uses the spring item 3 times in a course to obtain all 3 hidden puzzle pieces. A metaphor for the 3 parts of a hero's journey, perhaps? I haven't even gotten into this game's accessibility features. If you want to turn down the game's music, you can. If you want to play the game in French, you can. If you want to make John's girlfriend wear a hat, you can. This absurd attention to detail makes Garfield Kart Furious Racing stand out above even the best of the non-licensed genre. You heard me, it's better than The Last of Us, Succession, Jaws, The Color Blue, Chili Cheese Fritos, The Last of Us, My Friend's Dad, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, Despicable Me 3, The Last of Us, Dennis Quaid, Dakota, Smosh Babies, The Bible, The Last of Us, Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald, Chobits, Dear Evan Hansen, Sachi's Monstrous Appetite, The Last of Us, and obviously 9/11. If this game was a house, I would live in it. If this game was a human, I would marry it. If this game were the numbers on the back of your credit card, I would ask you for it. It's for all of these reasons and more that Garfield Kart Furious Racing is one of the best video games of all time. A true 9 out of 10. Following in the footsteps of the licensed kart racer, though, is an even more exciting development. Now that Nintendo's biggest multiplayer series has been copied and cloned to all hell, companies have started replicating Nintendo's second biggest multiplayer series, Super Smash Bros. Yep, I'm talking about the recent rise of the licensed platform fighter. Now, there aren't a ton of these just yet. Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl and Multiverses are the only major examples, with Brawlhalla not 100% being this, but definitely leaning into the licensed crossover aspect more than most. But I really want this momentum to continue and for more of these to pop up, both because it's funny to see Bugs Bunny or Garfield in a Smash Brothers-like environment in the same way it's funny to see Hello Kitty or the Smurfs in a Mario Kart-like environment, and because platform fighters require much more effort to reproduce than cookie-cutter racing games. You can't just slap together 8 basic courses with 8 identical characters. You need to actually design unique movesets, stages with set dressing, items and modes sometimes, online play, updates, core tenets of the fighting game genre that you can't just ignore even in the lowest of low budgets. A minimum amount of effort that makes even the weaker examples of this phenomenon stand out from the kart racing contemporaries, while still retaining the inherent silliness that comes from this sort of mashup. One of the earliest and least talked about examples of this comes from Vicious Cycle Software, the developers of Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures of all things, who in 2015 released Kung Fu Panda: Showdown of Legendary Legends. Yes, there is a platform fighter based on the Kung Fu Panda series. This is a thing that exists apparently. And out of all the major Smash clones, this is probably the most Smash clone of them. It has standard directional attacks and aerials, the expected shielding and dodging systems, neutral down, up and side specials, smash attacks, final smashes, item drops, assist trophies, final destination, battlefield, Luigi's Mansion, fucking coin battle. Not even Smash Ultimate has that. Obviously, the gameplay is much more clunky than its source material, with most moves having a lot of in-lag, controls not being really well explained, and several characters having obtuse movesets in general, but otherwise this is literally just a DreamWorks take on Smash. And it's not great, but not terrible either. Let's compliment Sandwich this. Positive number 1, the roster is surprisingly big and varied. The base game includes Po, Tigress, Shifu, Crane, Monkey, Mr. Ping, Tai Lung, Lord Shen, Wolf Boss, Storming Ox, Croc, Soothsayer, Rhino Commander Bashir, Suwu, Master Boar, Gorilla Soldier, Mei Mei, Master Bear, Oogway, and Baby Po. If you're wondering who some of these folks are, you're not alone, because this game has some deep cuts. Suwu was from a short film on the Kung Fu Panda 2 Blu-ray. Master Boar was a character character cut from Kung Fu Panda 2, only being mentioned in a single line of dialogue. Wolf Boss and Gorilla Soldier represent generic mooks of the villain from Kung Fu Panda 2. I honestly love how deep some of these cuts are, really makes the game stand out. Negative number 1, a lot of the characters have poorly designed movesets. For instance, the protagonists of these types of crossover fighters usually have the most straightforward movesets. In Smash, Mario is the character specifically designed for beginners, in Multiversus, Shaggy has the simplest character mechanic, and in Nick All-Stars Brawl, SpongeBob is apparently a Shoto. To some extent, this also applies to Poe in Showdown of Legendary Legends. Most of his moves are relatively simple melee punches, compared to Mei Mei with her ribbon moves and the Soothsayer with her mystic mechanics. However, if you look at how Poe fights in the movies, you'll notice that weight is a major element of his kung fu style. It gives him a sense of momentum that the other fighters lack, allowing his different moves to naturally flow together as the force of his weight overwhelms his opponents. Video game Poe doesn't have that. Most of his moves stand completely on their own. A singular punch or kick or belly flop with enough end lag that leading into other attacks is difficult. It leaves him feeling very slow and disjointed in his moveset, a heavyweight character with little utility to those first starting the game. This somehow applies to some of the light characters as well. You'd think that someone as small and nimble as Shifu would be a good starting point, but his moves are also oddly incongruent. They're faster and weaker like one would expect, but they still have the same lag between attacks that heavier characters have, thus making the differences feel negligible. Positive number 2, some of the characters are fun to play. My favorite was definitely Mr. Ping. He has a constant unlimited heal move, a healthy mix of chip damage projectiles and high damage smash attacks. He attacks with noodles. How can you not love this guy? They even got James Hong to reprise his role. Nice. Then my second favorite would probably be Baby Poe, and yes, Baby Poe is playable. They finally copied the part of Mario Kart that Smash was afraid to, baby characters. Which of course means you can do fun stuff like this. I'm a bad person. Negative number 2, some of the characters are now inaccessible. Shortly after the release of Kung Fu Panda 3, they added the characters of Bao, Li Shan, Master Shaken, Kai, Warrior Poe, Rhino Armor Lee, Armored Mr. Ping, Zombie Porcupine, and stages based off of the Master Garden, Panda Vista, Panda Village, and Spirit Realm. Unfortunately, the developers lost the Kung Fu Panda license a few years ago, and it's now basically impossible to experience this DLC. Makes it kinda weird that 2 of said characters appear on the game's box art. I know, several of those characters were variations that don't sound particularly exciting, but come on, Li Shan is literally played by Bryan Cranston in the movie. Did y'all know that? Funny meme Breaking Bad guy played Poe's dad in a Kung Fu Panda film? Fun fact, the Kung Fu Panda 3 Blu-ray had an alternate ending that revealed the entire movie was a weird dream Walter White had after eating too many dumplings, which in turn was a bad dream that Hal from Malcolm in the Middle had after eating too many pixie sticks. I'm not super up to date on the Bryan Cranston cinematic universe, but I'm pretty sure Malcolm in the Middle was a dream that Tim Whatley from Seinfeld had after eating too much kielbasa. Don't quote me on that. Positive numero trace. Fun stages. There's some creative picks from throughout the Kung Fu Panda trilogy here, with a nice balance between simple and gimmicky stages. Of course, the Jade Palace Arena is our flat final destination, while the Jade Palace Dojo is full of wacky hazards and training material. The bridge fight from the first film has its own flat and simple stage, Shen's Fortress from the second film has a dynamic building-sized course, and my personal favorite, Tai Lung's escape from prison is translated into this incredibly dynamic scrolling stage full of oncoming arrows, falling platforms, and crumbling terrain. The stage music is mostly just MIDI versions of the movie score, but it's fucking Hans Zimmer and John Powell. Not even the worst MIDI sound font in the world could ruin the works of Hans Zimmer. Wait, no, never mind. Negative number 3, the entire game is now inaccessible, as in, it's not available on digital storefronts. You have to buy one of the finite physical copies that exist to experience it, which is unfortunately all too common in the license scene even today. We may live in the age of digital storefronts, but licensing fees are still licensing fees. If the publisher intends for this to be a disposable cash grab, they are not going to put any effort towards preservation unless there's a huge fan outcry asking for it. Scott Pilgrim vs. the Game, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, was a rare case where this was fixed and the game was brought back with a physical copy, but there's still a chance that the digital version goes away again, and even if it doesn't, most other licensed games aren't going to get that treatment. This particularly worries me with the even newer trend of licensed service games, experiences that are exclusively digital and exclusively online, where even a physical release or pirated copy wouldn't be able to preserve it in its original form. Most examples of licensed service games so far are based on the aforementioned big three of Star Wars, Marvel, and DC. Battlefront 2 is technically still trucking even if it had an infamously bad launch, but Marvel's Avengers, despite being based on one of the biggest franchises of all time right now, is already ending its service come September. DC's Suicide Squad game technically isn't even out yet, but yeah, y'all know this ain't gonna last either. If the big three can't sustain a consistently updating business model despite their massive budgets and wide appeal, you know something smaller like Disney Dreamlight Valley or Disney Speedstorm won't last. We're already seeing this decline in the final game I'm talking about today, Multiverses. This game makes me sad. See, I really enjoyed Multiverses when it first started. I downloaded it during the open beta last July and was genuinely impressed with what Warner Brothers' take on the platform fighter had to offer. Unlike Kung Fu Panda, there were clear efforts to make this experience stand out from Smash, and they can be found right there in the title. Multiverses, multiple verses. This is a 2v2 teamwork-focused brawler rather than your traditional 1v1 fighting game with 2v2 options. Every character is designed not only to fight for themselves, but to support an ally, adding an entirely new strategic element to battles. Multiverses, multiverses, as in these different Warner Brothers characters come from an in-story multiverse, meaning they can actually interact like how they would in their source material. It being 2v2 means you can create wild team-ups reminiscent of those in the Subspace Emissary with actual dialogue this time to boot. Superman and the Iron Giant, Steven Universe and Morty, Arya Stark and whatever Rain Dog is. The different character classes add so much variety in what team-ups one can do. You can go double bruiser with Batman and Shaggy, passing back and forth a batarang to juggle opponents in their combined powerhouse of attacks. You can mix supports and tanks with a defensive character like Wonder Woman, spitting out damage and tanking large hits while Gizmo lingers behind, pelting the enemy with attacks and pelting his ally with heals. Assassins are nimble glass cannons, and mages are projectile-focused characters. The selection and variety adds an MMO-esque level of teamwork spacing and meter management that I'm not used to as a casual Smash player, and it really grabbed me in. While Warner Brothers brand crossovers had gotten pretty old at this point, with the Lego Movie, Ready Player One, Scoob, and Space Jam 2 all desperately trying to make the Warner Brothers cinematic universe a thing, it worked for me in this case because of the insane attention to detail in the characters' movesets and animations. It almost felt like an animation-themed fighting game. Bugs Bunny has all kinds of cartoon tropes in his moveset, like falling anvils and giant hammers. Tom and Jerry literally fight each other to fight everyone else. Taz has a move that bunches people up into a fighting cloud and can inflict a status effect that turns the opponent into a giant roast chicken. Velma fights with text bubbles and janky Hanna-Barbera animation. The DC characters are all based on their timeless comic counterparts, featuring one of the final performances of Kevin Conroy as Batman. The Iron Giant is playable and to scale, which is such a hilarious power move as far as platform fighters go. Cartoon Network and Adult Swim have 3 shows represented with 2 characters in 1 stage each, even if one of these has aged poorly, but let's not talk about that right now. Marvin the Martian has the exact sound effects he does from the cartoons. Fucking LeBron James is in the game as a Space Jam rap. God, and there's so much else they could do in the future too. The Warners as a tag team character, Pinky and the Brain like the Ice Climbers, Fred Flintstone clubbing people to death, older CN representatives like Powerpuff Girls or Samurai Jack, other representatives for existing series like Marceline, Spinel, Daffy Duck, or Scooby-Doo. It's funny because there are technically live-action characters in the game too. Gizmo and Stripe from Gremlins and Arya from Game of Thrones are playable wildly enough. The former fit well enough because they're puppets in the source material, although I wouldn't be lying if I said that Arya feels a little out of place. Like, when Arya KOs someone, Arya's pie appears on the battlefield and gives negative status effects to opponents who touch it. If you know, you know. It's horrifying and honestly kind of awesome. Maybe it was worth it for her to be here. I'm getting a little off track, but yeah, the game wasn't perfect. 2v2 can get a little too chaotic on certain maps and it takes a bit too long for characters to die, and being a service game, there is some bad monetization stuff that's bad. But the open beta was so fun and so promising that I had hope for the game's future as the developers listened to feedback and improved upon things while keeping the game fresh with new characters and new stages. Hope that was probably misguided because when the game launched, it pretty quickly went downhill. Yeah, this game's rollout from the first official season onward was bad. There were some nice updates, like fixing up the game's hitboxes and adding a rudimentary classic mode, and even attempting to update the game's online, but oh boy, did everything else around it just get worse and worse as time went on. The quick and transparent character rollout of the beta was traded out for a poorly communicated and poorly scheduled trickle of random characters in random orders. In July, they revealed they were adding Rick, Morty, and LeBron James, with LeBron launching during the open beta and Rick and Morty launching during Season 1. Then Season 1 came and launched with just Morty, not Rick. But Morty was delayed by a week, so the first season actually launched without a character and Morty came right after. Okay, so the next character is gonna be Rick, right? No, it's Gizmo from Gremlins out of nowhere. Then 2 weeks later they finally added Rick, and then 2 weeks later they added Stripe from Gremlins as a separate character. And then Black Adam has a clear promotional pick for the movie, and in this meantime they added 0 new stages besides the Space Jam one that was only available in custom matches until season 2. Y'all confused yet? So was I, and that's not even touching upon the season 1 battle pass itself, which was also bad. It didn't gift premium currency back, which is a huge red flag for any service game player, but more pertinently, the rewards themselves were bad. The premium track had toasts, which are gifts of 20 coins you can give to allies or opponents or CPUs after a match. Thanks. Then there were a stunning 5 skins and 8 taunts, the best of which were hidden way at the end of the track, and the rest of which are boring. They don't even cover the full roster or apply to any of the new characters of the season. Who wouldn't want to grind away 1 level a day, 50 days in a row for LeBron James in a Robin outfit? Now, usually this kind of cosmetic stuff wouldn't bug me, but this was going to be the main income source for this game's free-to-play model. A pitifully bad season pass like this one isn't exactly a great place to start, and the subsequent season 2 launch did nothing to bring me back in. They added a new season pass, Marvin the Martian, 2 stages, and beyond a few holiday skin events, that's been it for the past 4 months. A battle pass with 4 costumes. Why? So these days, this game just makes me sad. Such a promising start that immediately fell into bad decisions that have seemingly kneecapped it for the foreseeable future. Maybe since Season 2 is almost done, we'll get a proper Season 3 update with an improved Season Pass and a bunch of clearly mapped out characters and stages and promises of content to come, but with how much revenue has already dried up and with Warner Brothers being Warner Brothers, I honestly expect the opposite. An end of service long before the game can realize its true gameplay and roster potential, making what was already realized permanently inaccessible. No matter how good or bad the game is, I think we can all agree that no work of art deserves to become permanently inaccessible, but such is the case for so many service games and license games these days. Honestly, the two mediums have more in common than you'd think. They're both profit-driven, unsustainable, show off some of the worst vices of the industry, and regardless of individual quality, are not very likely to last. So perhaps license games are living on in a bizarre, depressing way that isn't just limited to movie tie-ins. Talk about a downer ending. This lack of permanence in the digital age of gaming is ultimately why I've made these license game videos in the first place. I acknowledge that these are low rungs of art, vestiges of a bygone era that not many are looking to play nonetheless preserve. I get it. But as I've said before, even the lowest form of art is still art. Even works that can literally not be preserved have value. Hundreds of people worked on these games, put thousands of hours into making them the best they could be under difficult circumstances. As just one person, I can't single-handedly preserve all of these experiences, but I can create a snapshot, a collection of analyses of different archetypes in the genre that paint a wider picture of how it is, or in the future, how it was. Playing these lower rungs of art so you don't have to, if you will, but also to find hidden gems or ounces of quality in the mundane and forgotten. I may love some more than others, but I don't want any of them to disappear from history, especially when a corporation isn't going to know the difference between a Scrat's Nutty Adventure and a Save the Light. These products may be disposable to the people who greenlit them, and even some of the people who played them, but it's not to the ones who made them and the ones who actually did find something to enjoy in them. To quote an iconic speech from the end of my favorite Pixar film, "In many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and themselves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read. But the bitter truth we critics must face is that your free trial to the Film Script Archive has now ended. To continue reading this script, please input your payment information below. Card number 4858771104520144. Expiration date October 2025. Security code 427. I will be returning to Gusto soon, hungry for more." Anyway, before I go, I just want to say they should do a Puss in Boots video game based off of The Last Wish, but with an original story featuring a mix of Uncharted-style linear set pieces and Zelda-style puzzle-filled dungeons. You can choose to play as Puss in Boots or Kitty Softpaws, with Puss being combat-focused and Kitty being stealth-focused. You unlock items for each of the dungeons so you can solve puzzles, and you encounter fiendish enemies based off of different twisted fairy tales. Purito is there, continuing to be wholesome and played by my idol Harvey Guillen, and the art style is still really pretty and paintbrush-inspired, and the game is good and awesome. That's my pitch. This is your payoff to watching me prattle on about licensed games for an hour. Why did you do that? You literally could have done anything else with your life in that hour. Whatever. I guess some people just don't value their lives that much. This video was really hard to put together. Analyzing 9 games across 3 platforms in an hour-long video is much harder than analyzing 5 games on one platform in a 30-minute long video. Who'da thought? So if you enjoyed this video and would like to support the channel, feel free to donate to my Patreon. For as low as $3 to $5 a month, you can get an amazing set of perks, including early access to new videos, your name listed in the credits, behind-the-scenes blog posts, and an exclusive Discord server. The more support I get, the more time I can dedicate to the channel to make in-depth video essays like these, so be sure to click the link in the description below or go to patreon.com/JennyGeist. Today I'll be giving a shout out to my patrons at the producer tier and above, those being Ace L, Arcade Flower 190, Chloe BC, Danny, Fusefall, Joy Content, Oliver Krikorin, Oski, Simon Welsh, and Vincent Coates. With that said, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all later.